Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into the freezing, salt-stung nightmare of a voyage no sane person would take, sailing the North Sea in the Middle Ages. You've probably seen it in paintings or fantasy shows. Proud ships with crisp sails cutting through blue water, brave crews staring down the horizon. The truth? You're trapped on a leaking wooden box that smells like dead fish and human misery, surrounded by half-starved men who might throw you overboard if the sea doesn't get you first. And ahead of you, the Maelstrom, a whirlpool big enough to chew your ship to splinters and drag you down so deep the sunlight forgets you ever existed. This isn't swashbuckling adventure. It's cold, hunger, superstition, and the slow, awful moment you realize the ocean has already decided you're not going home. This is why you wouldn't survive sailing through a medieval maelstrom. And trust me, by the end, you'll think twice about even stepping on a rowboat. So before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up on a creaking medieval cog headed straight for the North Sea, and within 3 seconds, you know you've made a terrible life choice. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a pile of damp wool blankets over a board nailed to the hull, and the motion beneath you is not the soothing rock of a cradle. It's the unpredictable lurch of a wooden box riding an angry, endless animal. The smell hits you before your eyes even open. A heady cocktail of tar, wet hemp rope, bilge water, and the kind of unwashed human that has long since gone feral. You cough, gag, and consider going back to sleep, but the ship has other plans. Forget the smooth-sailing fantasy you've been fed by pirate movies. No gleaming decks, no swashbuckling heroes with perfect teeth, no dramatic sunsets over calm horizons. This isn't adventure. It's an endurance test in floating misery. The cog is barely more than a barge with aspirations, one mast straining under a square sail patched so many times it's practically a quilt. Every plank is swollen from salt water, and every nail squeals in protest with each roll of the sea. There's no private cabin, no hammocks swaying gently under lantern light. You're wedged between barrels of pickled fish and a coil of rope that smells like it's been dragged through every harbor latrine from Bruges to Bergen. The crew is already awake, if they slept at all. Some are hauling lines, their bare feet blackened from tar and frost. Others are squatting by a bucket that passes for both breakfast and laundry duty, their hands raw from salt and wind. You try to pick out who's in charge, but the man yelling orders is only slightly louder than the one arguing about a rat he swears stole his last biscuit. There's a rhythm to the chaos, a grim competence buried under the cursing and the stench, but it's not the kind of confidence that inspires you. It's the kind that says, "We've done this before, and we only lost 3 men last time." The ship groans as it takes another swell, the deck slick with a thin glaze of seawater and fish guts. The North Sea doesn't believe in easing you into the day. It slaps you awake with wind sharp enough to cut through wool and into bone. Somewhere above, the sail snaps in the gusts like a banner in a war you didn't sign up for. You pull your blanket tighter, but the cold is a living thing, slipping under your clothes and curling into your ribs. The talk on deck is low, but you catch fragments. They're speaking of currents and rocks, of ships swallowed whole, of a place where the sea itself turns against you. The word comes up again and again, heavy as lead. The Maelstrom. You've heard of it, even inland. The great whirlpool off the coast of Norway, where tides and winds and deep ocean forces collide to drag ships down into blackness. Sailors tell stories of it big enough to drink the moon from the sky, of masts reappearing days later, snapped and chewed, miles from where they vanished. Some say it's the mouth of the underworld. Others say it's where the sea keeps its grudges. No one says it's safe. You try to laugh it off. But there's no mistaking the way the crew avoids your eyes when you ask questions. They busy themselves with knots that don't need tying, or stare at the horizon as if by will alone they can keep it empty. The captain, a man with more beard than face, gives you a look that's equal parts pity and amusement. The look of someone who's seen this exact shade of naive terror before. He doesn't tell you it'll be fine. He doesn't tell you you'll make it. He just spits over the side and yells at a boy to check the rigging. The sky is a smear of gray, the kind that promises weather, whether you want it or not. The wind smells different now, sharper, carrying something metallic under the salt, as if the sea ahead has its own scent. Somewhere out there, beyond the mist and the jagged coastline, the water is twisting into itself with enough force to crush wood like eggshells. The old hands say you can hear it before you see it, a low, endless roar that crawls into your bones. You hope they're wrong. You pull yourself upright, legs unsteady on the wet deck, and watch as the crew goes about their work with the fatalism of men who have long since accepted the sea's terms. The sail strains, the ropes creak, and the cog noses toward that vast, unseen danger like a moth toward a torch. Somewhere deep down you realize the truth. You're not on an adventure. You're on a slow, deliberate march toward a place where the sea itself decides who leaves. And you have a feeling it doesn't like your chances. From the moment you lay eyes on her, you know this ship is not ready for anything except an argument with gravity. She's a medieval cog, which is to say she's essentially a wooden box someone gave a mast to. One single mast, planted dead center, straining under a square sail the size of a village laundry line, patched with whatever cloth was lying around. Old tunics, spare blankets, possibly something that once belonged to a goat. There are no watertight compartments, no clever bulkheads to keep the sea where it belongs. If water gets in, it goes everywhere, and if enough gets in, it takes the whole ship with it. She's not built to shrug off disaster. She's built to survive the days when disaster is feeling lazy. Back at the shipyard, quality control was mostly a man in a leather cap spitting into the wind and declaring it a good omen. Planks were inspected with a quick kick of the boot, nails hammered in until they stopped falling out, and the seams caulked with tar and sheep's wool as if that combination could hold back an ocean. The builders spoke in low voices about saints and lucky tides, never about structural integrity. Every nail driven was accompanied by a muttered prayer, and when the prayers ran out, they just nailed faster. If the ship floated during the first launch, it was blessed by God. If it didn't, well, perhaps God needed another boat for his personal collection. Now, at sea, every joint and seam in this vessel is auditioning for a part in a tragedy. The hull groans constantly, a deep, weary sound, like a sleeping animal that doesn't want to be woken. The mast complains in the wind, shuddering when the sail catches a sudden gust. The ropes creak and sigh, as if they, too, would rather be anywhere else. When the ship leans into a swell, the timbers shift just enough for you to imagine the whole frame loosening, plank by plank, until you and the rest of the crew are bobbing in the open water like very confused bait. It doesn't take bad weather to make the ship feel fragile, but bad weather helps. The moment the wind picks up, the deck begins to feel alive, tilting and bucking underfoot, the seams between planks flexing just enough for seawater to spit through in little sprays. You try not to notice the way the caulking seems to darken each time the water finds a new path. Above you, the sail snaps hard enough to make your teeth rattle, and the whole mast leans with a groan that sounds too much like surrender. There is nothing between you and the sea but a few inches of softwood that's been soaking in brine since the day it left the yard. You can press your palm to the inside wall and feel the ocean on the other side, a cold presence humming through the timber. There's no iron hull, no steel reinforcement, nothing to stop a wave from deciding it wants a closer look at your ribs. If the sea comes in, it doesn't politely trickle. It pours, heavy and fast, and there's nowhere for it to go but into your boots, your bedding, and eventually your lungs. The captain likes to remind everyone that this cog has made the trip before, as though that's proof of her seaworthiness. But even the greenest sailor knows a ship doesn't survive a crossing because it's invincible. It survives because the sea allowed it. Out here, that allowance feels very temporary. You catch the ship listing into another swell, the bow climbing slow, then slapping down into the trough with a hollow crash that sends shivers up through the deck and into your spine. For a moment, you wonder if you actually heard the wood crack, or if your mind is inventing it to pass the time. Night doesn't make it better. In the dark, every sound is amplified, every creak becomes a warning, every splash against the hull, a question you can't answer. You lie there, listening to the ship shift and groan, imagining each sound as the prelude to the sea finally punching through. The wood smells faintly of rot where salt has eaten into it, and in certain places, the grain feels soft to the touch. You wonder how many more trips she has in her before she stops pretending to be a ship and finally becomes driftwood. No one says it aloud, but everyone feels it. This vessel isn't ready. Not for a storm, not for the Maelstrom, not even for the kind of day where the wind changes its mind too often. She's a gamble in wood and rope, held together by tar, superstition, and the stubborn refusal of her crew to admit they're sailing in a coffin with a mast. The only thing standing between you and the cold, deep truth of the North Sea is the hope that today isn't the day the ocean decides to collect. The first thing you notice about the crew is that they don't look like the rugged, salt-weathered mariners from paintings. They look like men who have been tricked, bribed, or outright dragged onto this ship, which, in fairness, most of them have. Half are peasants pulled from villages with promises of pay they'll never see. The rest are petty criminals, offered a choice between the rope of the gallows and the ropes of the rigging. It's hard to say which is kinder. Their clothes are patched from whatever scraps they could find. Wool tunics, frayed hose, a few stolen cloaks, and every garment carries the same damp, fishy smell that clings to the ship itself. They are missing teeth, missing fingers, missing the spark of someone who believes this trip will end well. At the top of this grim pyramid is the captain, a man with the posture of someone permanently braced for bad news. His beard is streaked with salt, not from age, but from the spray of every wave that's ever hit him in the face. He doesn't smile much, and when he does, it's not the kind that makes you feel better. Beneath him are the mates, the ones who actually give orders. They bark at the men in a mixture of insults and half-coherent nautical terms, as though sheer volume will make up for the fact that no one is entirely sure what they're doing. Then there's the navigator, who would be the most important man on board if he weren't half drunk most of the time. His tools are a cracked astrolabe, a warped map, and a gut feeling that northish is close enough. He smells perpetually of sour ale and bad decisions. The rest of the crew forms a loose hierarchy based on how loudly they can curse and how convincingly they can pretend to know knots. There's a boy no older than 12 who fetches things for everyone but is trusted with nothing sharper than a spoon. There's a one-eyed man whose entire job seems to be glaring at people until they work faster. And then there's the big one. Every crew has one, built like a barn door, and just as conversational. He lifts barrels, hauls lines, and occasionally throws a troublemaker across the deck when the mates get tired of yelling. What passes for seamanship here is less a matter of skill and more a shared agreement to do things in roughly the same direction. When the wind shifts, the crew stumbles toward the ropes, shouting over one another about which line to pull, and somehow the sail gets turned before the ship drifts too far off course. No one measures speed. No one keeps a log worth reading. And when someone claims to have seen land, the others just squint into the mist and pretend they see it too. Experience is measured not in years at sea, but in the number of trips survived, and most of these men have the kind of haunted stares that suggest Survival was a matter of luck, not skill. Trust is in short supply. Every rope, every block, every sail is a potential point of betrayal. The man next to you might save your life in a squall or let you tumble overboard because he owes you money. Knots are tied in ways that make sense only to the person who tied them, and more than once you've seen two men undoing and redoing the same line in opposite directions until the mate comes over to shout them into agreement. Tools disappear. Buckets get borrowed and never returned. If something breaks, the blame is passed around like a hot coal until someone at the bottom of the pecking order is forced to fix it, usually with a bit of spare rope and a prayer. Conversations, when they happen, are coarse and short-lived, peppered with tales of ports visited, fights won, and debts unpaid. There's laughter, but it's sharp-edged, the kind that dies quickly when the wind picks up or the hull groans louder than usual. No one here is under the illusion that they are a band of brothers. They are a temporary alliance of necessity, bound together by the thin hope of reaching port alive. When you watch them work, you can almost believe they're a team, until you notice the sideways glances, the muttered curses, the way hands linger on knives just a little too long. Out here, survival isn't about loyalty. It's about making sure you're not the one holding the wrong rope when the sea decides to collect its due. The first thing that hits you each morning isn't the cold, or the sound of gulls, or the slap of waves against the hull. It's the smell. It wraps around you before your eyes are even open. A dense, sticky presence that seeps into your clothes and hair and refuses to leave. The bilge is the foundation of it all, a stew of seawater, rotting wood, and whatever unfortunate scraps have been swept below deck over the past few weeks. It never dries, it never drains, and it's always there, breathing up through the cracks in the planks like the exhalations of something old and patient and entirely uninterested in your survival. Layered on top of that is the constant reek of fish. Not the crisp, briny scent you might imagine from a morning catch, but the sour, oily smell of guts left to bake in the sun, then soaked again in salt spray until they form a thin, rancid crust on the deck. Barrels of pickled herring are stacked in the hold, their brine leaking in slow dribbles that mingle with the bilge water below. Even when you're not near them, the scent clings to the air, finding its way into your blankets, your bread, even the skin of your hands, until you start to wonder if you smell it in your sleep. And then there's the human layer. Dozens of bodies crammed into a space built for maybe half that number, sweating under wool tunics and heavy cloaks even in the cold, because the wind will slice you to the bone otherwise. That sweat has nowhere to go. There are no baths here, no chance to rinse off in fresh water, and the salt spray doesn't cleanse so much as preserve the smell, sealing it into the fabric until it's part of the weave. After a few days, you stop noticing your own stench and start noticing everyone else's, which is somehow worse. The grain stores don't help. Rats have found them, of course. They always do. They chew through the sacks in the dark, leaving trails of droppings and the occasional half-gnawed kernel. You hear them at night, the scratch of tiny claws on wood, the squeak of teeth working through another patch of canvas. The crew pretends not to notice unless the infestation becomes too bold, and then they deal with it in ways that make the hold smell worse before it smells better. Sometimes you see one in daylight, fat and smug, sitting in the rigging like it's another member of the crew. No one bothers to chase it. Salt water does its own slow work on everything you own. The moment you brought your pack aboard, the damp claimed it. Every stitch, every scrap of leather, every page in your little book of notes now carries a faint curl from the moisture that seeps in, no matter how carefully you try to keep it dry. Boots never lose that wet heaviness. Socks stiffen into something that feels like they're made from sandpaper. And any bit of metal begins to bloom with rust almost immediately. Your blanket, meant to keep you warm, feels cold and clammy each time you wrap it around yourself, as if it's just been pulled from a rain barrel. The irony is that the sea itself can smell beautiful, clean, sharp, alive. But you'll never know that scent here. Every breath you take is filtered through the vessel first, the air picking up the stink of pitch, mold, and the living cargo of men and vermin before it reaches you. Even when the wind catches you on the open deck, it carries the reminder of what you're standing on. The so-called fresh breeze is always tainted by the reality beneath your feet, the tang of salt mingling with the sour reek of the bilge and the unwashed. After a week, you realize you can't tell where you end and the ship begins. The smell has worked its way into you. It sits in your hair, behind your teeth, in the folds of your skin. Even if you were to jump overboard and scrub yourself raw in the freezing waves, you know it would still be there, clinging. You stop dreaming of fresh air because the thought of it makes the reality worse. Out here, the smell isn't just something you live with, it's something you become. Navigation, in the medieval sense, is less about charts and instruments, and more about a fragile agreement between man and ocean that neither really intends to honor. There's no compass to guide you, no clock to measure your progress, no neat little map with a reassuring red arrow that says, "You are here." Your tools are the stars, the shape of the coastline, and an uneasy thing called dead reckoning, which is just a fancy way of saying, "We guessed." When the sky is clear and the shoreline is visible, this guessing feels almost competent. You spot a familiar headland or a rocky island that someone swears they've seen before. You match it to a crude drawing in a salt-stained chart, and you convince yourself you know where you are. At night, the stars are supposed to be your guides, glittering beacons that have been in the same place since long before any ship dared touch the open sea. The trouble is, the stars don't explain themselves. You have to know which cluster is which, how they rise and set with the seasons, and which ones won't lead you straight into a reef. Some men can read them well enough to keep a course. Others just nod along and pretend. Out here, pretending is almost as good as knowing, until it isn't. A few clouds can turn your celestial map into a blank slate, and then you're left staring up at a cold black nothing while the ship drifts wherever the wind decides. Cloud cover is when the panic starts. It's not loud, at least not at first. It begins with the navigator frowning a little more than usual, glancing at the horizon too often and muttering into his beard. The mates notice, and they start talking in low voices, careful not to let the crew hear. But sailors are animals tuned to fear, and they feel it before they see it. The work on deck gets sharper, more frantic. The laughter dies down, and every man starts glancing upward as if willing the sky to clear. When the clouds stay, the silence grows heavy, like the ship itself is holding its breath. The thing about dead reckoning is that it relies on knowing where you started and how fast you've gone since then. But the ocean doesn't care about your math. Currents drag you sideways, while the wind shoves you forward, and suddenly your neat little calculation of 10 knots for 5 hours is worth less than the barrel of pickled fish in the hold. A ship can wander hundreds of miles off course without anyone realizing it, and by the time the mistake is clear, it's too late to fix. You might spot a bit of coastline and think you've found your landmark, only to discover it's an entirely different shore in an entirely different country, and the locals are looking at you with the sort of curiosity that suggests they don't get many visitors and aren't sure if they should keep it that way. Sailor's instinct is the great myth of the age, the idea that a man who's been at sea long enough can feel where he is just by the taste of the air or the roll of the waves. In truth, instinct is usually just experience remembering the last time the ship ended up lost and praying not to repeat it. A seasoned sailor might know when the wind is shifting or when the swell means land is near, but those skills work best in familiar waters. Out here, in the cold and hostile reach of the North Sea, instinct is just a polite word for guessing with a little more swagger. When you watch the crew work the lines and glance nervously at the horizon, you can almost believe they know what they're doing. But then you see the navigator squinting at his warped map. Holding it at arm's length like distance might make it make more sense. His lips move, counting something only he can hear, and then he nods as if that settled it. The mates nod too, because disagreeing means admitting you're lost, and no one wants to be the first to say it. The ship sails on, the clouds hold their ground, and the water below is just as endless and featureless as it was yesterday. You start to understand that the real art of navigation here isn't finding your way, it's pretending you haven't lost it. In the Middle Ages, there's no such thing as a weather forecast, no charts of shifting pressure, no satellites watching clouds from above, no cheerful man in a doublet telling you to expect a high chance of storms. Out here, the only meteorology you get comes from omens, half-remembered sayings, and the suspicious behavior of gulls. If the sunrise is too red, someone mutters about the blood of drowned sailors. If the wind smells different, the old hands whisper about storms. If a certain crewmate sneezes twice before breakfast, you're apparently doomed before the day begins. The sea has its own language, and the trouble is, no one agrees on how to translate it. For a while, the sky can be a perfect dome of pale blue, the sun warming the deck just enough to make you think you might live through this trip. The wind fills the sail with a steady push, and the ship glides along as if it were meant to do this forever. You start to believe in the day, maybe even relax enough to lean against the rail and breathe air that doesn't smell entirely like rotting fish. Then, without warning, the light changes. A shadow ripples across the deck, not from a cloud but from a wall of gray swelling on the horizon. Someone sees it, then another, and suddenly the calm isn't calm anymore. It's a silence that's waiting to be broken. Squalls arrive like they've been hunting you for hours and finally caught up. One moment the air is steady, the next it punches into the sail hard enough to jerk the mast sideways. The temperature drops so fast, it feels like someone's pulled the heat straight out of your bones. Rain follows in icy sheets, stinging your skin and soaking through wool as if it were gauze. The deck turns slick in seconds, and the ropes swell with water until they're heavy and hard to grip. The crew scrambles to shorten the sail before the wind tears it to ribbons, the canvas snapping like whips that could take off a finger if you're foolish enough to be in the way. And just when you think you've found a rhythm to surviving the storm, holding on, ducking the worst of the spray, squinting through the chaos, something larger moves beneath you. Rogue waves aren't poetic metaphors. They're sudden, rising walls of water that lift the ship like a toy, hold it there just long enough to show you the whole dizzying drop, and then throw you down into it. The impact rattles your teeth and slams the timbers until you wonder if the ship's heart gave out. Somewhere behind you, a barrel breaks loose and skitters across the deck, a reminder that the sea doesn't need to sink you outright. It can just let your own ship tear itself apart. Summer offers no comfort. The rain still falls cold enough to numb your fingers, the wind cuts sharper than a knife, and the fog rolls in thick enough to swallow the horizon whole. The old hands claim they can hear storms coming through the fog, a low growl hidden under the creak of the rigging. But all you can hear is your own pulse in your ears. Every shift of the wind is a threat. Every change in the water's surface, from glassy, calm to quick, sharp ripples, feels like the start of something that will end badly. What makes it worse is how quickly it all changes. You can go from calm seas to chaos in less time than it takes to blink the salt from your eyes. One minute you're steady under a gentle wind. The next, the sky has turned black at the edges. The sail is jerking like a trapped animal, and the crew is shouting over one another to pull in lines that just minutes ago they were letting out. There's no build-up, no steady drumbeat of warning, just the sudden, undeniable certainty that you are in trouble. In the end, sailing in medieval waters means living in a constant state of readiness for the sky to betray you. The omens, the old sayings, the sudden silences, they're not protection. They're just reminders that out here, the weather doesn't arrive. It strikes. You learn quickly that the food on board is less about nourishment and more about survival in the most begrudging sense of the word. The ship's biscuit is your constant companion, a dense beige slab that looks harmless enough until you try to bite it. It's not bread in any form you'd recognize. It's a brick baked until all trace of moisture has been murdered out of it. You don't chew it so much as grind it down, and sometimes it wins. The older biscuits have their own ecosystem. Little white weevils that crunch under your teeth if you don't take the time to knock them out first. The crew tells you not to bother. Adds protein, they say, with a grin that isn't entirely a joke. Then there's the salt meat. It lives in barrels, submerged in brine so concentrated it could strip paint if you had any on board. The meat itself is unidentifiable. Beef, pork, goat. No one can say for sure. What you do know is that it's been salted and resalted to the point where chewing it feels like gnawing on a chunk of seawater that's been left to dry in the sun. Some pieces are so old they crumble in your hands, others so tough they fight you for every bite. You can't wash the taste away. It lingers in your mouth, in the back of your throat, in your sweat. After a few days, you begin to suspect the barrels are less a method of preservation and more a slow form of poisoning. The ale ration is the only relief you have, and even that is rationed with military stinginess. Fresh water is impossible to keep drinkable for long. It turns foul in the casks, green and sour, so the ale is safer, at least in theory. But it's thin, flat, and warm, and the officers guard the supply as if it were gold. You get your cup in the morning and another in the evening, and you make it last, because there's nothing worse than eating salt meat and ship's biscuit with nothing to wash it down. The crew talks sometimes about better voyages, ships with fruit and fresh bread, but those are fairy tales meant to pass the time. Out here, the only green you'll see is the mold on the biscuit. And then there's the quiet, creeping enemy that no one likes to talk about, scurvy. It doesn't arrive with drama. It just settles in, slow and patient. First you feel tired. Then the gums start to ache. Then the teeth loosen. The old sailors know the signs and keep their mouths shut. Literally, because there's nothing to be done. No citrus, no vegetables, nothing but dry bread and dead meat. The officers call it weakness and tell you to keep working, but you notice them rubbing their own swollen joints when they think no one's watching. The sea takes its toll in many ways, but scurvy is one of its cruelest. It robs you slowly, in plain sight. Eating while the ship is in motion is an insult all on its own. You try to balance yourself on the heaving deck, holding a biscuit that could double as a weapon, and force yourself to chew while your stomach insists it has other plans. The smell of salt meat mingles with the stench of bilge and wet wool, and suddenly every bite feels like a dare. If the sea is calm, you might manage to choke down enough to keep going. If it's rough, you're just as likely to give your ration right back to the waves. The worst part is when the hunger comes back a few hours later, sharp and hollow, and you know you'll have to go through it all again. There are no meals to look forward to here, no warm dishes to lift the spirit. There is only fuel, and the grim ritual of consuming it. You eat because you must, because the work is relentless, and the sea doesn't care if you're starving. But every bite is a reminder that this ship is not a home, this voyage is not a pleasure, and your body is just another piece of cargo the ocean is wearing down. One hard biscuit at a time. It starts as a queasy flutter in the pit of your stomach, the sort of thing you might blame on bad bread or too much ale. But then the ship leans into a swell, the deck drops out from under your feet, and that flutter becomes a warning. Your stomach doesn't care that you've barely eaten or that the air is freezing. It's decided that the motion of the sea is a personal insult, and it's going to make its protest known. The rhythm of the waves becomes a cruel metronome, each rise and fall pulling the nausea tighter until your body is certain you've been poisoned, and the only cure is violent evacuation. Even the old hands aren't immune. They like to claim they've got sea legs, as if experience alone is armor against the sickness. But when the waves get high enough, when the wind pushes the ship into a sideways roll that throws you from one rail to the other, The difference between a green passenger and a seasoned sailor is only in how discreetly they stagger to the side to heave. The North Sea doesn't care how many voyages you've survived. It'll take the strongest stomach and wring it out like a rag. Throwing up over the side is its own special kind of misery. You clutch the rail with numb fingers, leaning into the freezing wind as it lashes your face with salt spray sharp enough to sting. The cold bites into your cheeks, the air steals your breath, and the ship's motion keeps trying to pull you backward while your stomach insists on pitching you forward. The wind doesn't always carry things away from the ship either. Sometimes it spits your shame right back at you, and in those moments, dignity becomes a distant luxury. There's a social shame to it that no one talks about openly. Everyone's done it, but no one wants to be caught in the act. You can feel the eyes on you as you grip the railing, your whole body shuddering, your pride evaporating with each retch. The crew pretends not to notice, but you hear the muffled laughter behind you, the little comments exchanged in low voices. On a ship this small, every weakness is public property. The toll it takes goes beyond embarrassment. You lose more than just the miserable contents of your stomach. Your strength leaks out with every heave, leaving your muscles shaky and your knees unsure. Work doesn't stop for the seasick. The sail still needs trimming, the lines still need hauling, and the deck still needs scrubbing. You force yourself upright, wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, and try to carry on as though you haven't just been half drowned in your own misery. But your stomach remembers, and it's ready to betray you again at the next unexpected roll. Worse is the way it lingers. Even when the sea calms, you still feel the phantom sway beneath your feet, a slow, nauseating echo that won't let you rest. The thought of food turns your stomach, but the hunger gnaws anyway, a dull reminder that you'll need to face another meal of hard biscuit and salt meat before long. Every swallow feels like a gamble. You begin to understand why some call seasickness a religion. It demands total surrender. It humbles you without mercy, strips away every shred of composure, and leaves you praying, not for salvation, but for stillness. You can't fight it with willpower. You can't negotiate with it, and you can't ignore it when it comes for you. Out here, the sea isn't just under the ship. It's inside you, churning and cold, and it will keep its hold until it decides you've suffered enough. The first sign of trouble is the scratching. It comes at night, faint but constant, like tiny teeth nibbling at the edges of your sanity. You lie there in the dark, trying to convince yourself it's the ship settling or the wind catching a rope. But you know better. The rats are awake. You hear them in the hold, in the walls, even above you in the rigging, claws ticking against the wood as they hunt for something edible or something they can chew just to see if they can. Ropes are fair game, and they go at them with the same determination they'd use on a sack of grain. More than one ship has woken to find a critical line gnawed to uselessness, the crew cursing as they try to splice it back together before the sea notices the weakness. If you were only dealing with rats, you might keep your sanity, but the ship carries other passengers, and they are far more personal. The fleas are bad enough, tiny specks that seem to thrive in wool no matter how much salt spray soaks it. You can pick them off by the dozen, and they'll be back by nightfall. Lice are worse. You feel them crawling along your scalp while you work, biting and burrowing as if your skin is just another deck to be claimed. The blankets you wrap around yourself at night are warm, but they're alive, and you learn quickly to stop thinking about what else is sharing them with you. Salt water doesn't help. It soaks everything, creeping into seams and stitching, softening the skin until it splits. The smallest scrape from a rope or nail becomes a sore, and the sores never heal. The constant damp keeps them raw, red, and weeping, perfect little invitations for infection. You try to keep them clean, but clean on a ship like this means rinsing with more salt water, which burns like fire and does nothing to stop the slow rot. Some men develop ulcers so deep they can barely walk, and still they're expected to haul lines and climb rigging as if the sea cares about their pain. Infections spread here like gossip. One man develops a rash, another picks up a cough, and before long, half the crew is scratching, spitting, or limping. Privacy is non-existent. You sleep, eat, and work elbow to elbow with the same men who are sneezing into their hands or scratching at open wounds. No one has the luxury of keeping to themselves. If someone's sick, you'll have it soon enough. It's less a question of if than when. The worst part is how normal it becomes. You stop flinching when you see a rat dart across the deck during supper. You stop worrying about the black dots in your blanket because you know they'll never be gone. You stop thinking about the sores on your arms except when they snag against a rope and start bleeding again. The ship itself feels alive in all the wrong ways. A moving, creaking ark for every parasite and pest that can survive the cold. Sometimes you catch sight of yourself in a piece of polished metal, a distorted reflection in a cooking pot, or the blade of a knife, and you barely recognize the person staring back. Hair matted, skin mottled with bites and bruises, eyes ringed with fatigue. You think of the stories people tell about brave sailors and heroic voyages, and you wonder if any of them ever mentioned the crawling, biting reality of the life. Out here, the sea is only half the battle. The rest is fought in the dark, in the seams of your clothing, and in the shadows where the rats wait for you to fall asleep. The ship's medicine chest is less a cabinet of cures and more a collection of desperate guesses. It sits in the corner of the captain's quarters, a wooden box that smells faintly of mold and something sharper. Old vinegar, maybe, or whatever's left of dried herbs crumbling in their cloth bundles. Inside, there are no clean instruments, no neat rows of bottles, just a jumble of tools and concoctions that could either help you or finish the job the sea started. Every treatment comes with a story, and none of them inspire confidence. For fevers, the preferred remedy is bleeding. The logic, if you can call it that, is simple. Let the sickness drain out with your blood. A strip of cloth is tied around your arm, a vein is found, and then the ship's surgeon, usually just the oldest sailor who once saw a real surgeon work, opens you up with a blade that's been wiped on his tunic. The sea is never still for this. The ship rolls and pitches while he works, the blade dipping or hesitating in time with the swell, and you sit there watching the dark stream run while your head grows lighter. No one measures how much blood is taken. They just stop when you look pale enough to match the linen. If your ailment is something the knife can't fix, the answer is often a poultice. These are made from whatever herbs are available, mashed into a paste with fat or oil until the mixture can be slapped directly onto your skin. Sometimes it's garlic, sometimes onion, sometimes a plant no one can name but swears will draw out the rot. The smell is usually worse than the wound it's meant to heal. A thick, sour stink that clings to you and makes your shipmates wrinkle their noses when you pass. If the herbs are scarce, the poultice might be made from chewed bread or crushed biscuit mixed with spit. No one pretends this is pleasant. Broken bones are another matter entirely. There's no splinting with neat bandages here. A pair of strong hands will grab the limb, yank it straight with one decisive pull, and then wrap it in whatever strips of cloth can be spared from torn sails or worn-out shirts. The pain is instant and absolute. No laudanum, no opium, nothing to soften the blow. Just a swig of ale if you're lucky, or someone shoving a bit of rope between your teeth so you don't bite through your tongue. You scream, not because you want to, but because the body has no other answer. Infections are treated with as much ceremony as bad weather. Wounds are rinsed with seawater, which burns like fire and leaves the skin angrier than before. Some swear by soaking the injury in brine, others by pressing hot metal to the flesh until the smell of charred skin fills the air. These are the moments when the ship's surgeon tells you to think of home, though home becomes a vague and far-off thing when your world narrows to the edge of a glowing blade. There's a strange faith in these methods, as if doing something, anything, must be better than nothing at all. And sometimes, against all odds, a man recovers. Not because the treatment worked, but because he was stubborn enough to live through it. More often, the cure leaves him weaker, slower, and more marked than the injury ever did. But no one questions it aloud. On a ship like this, there's no room for doubt. You take what help you're given, even if it comes with a blade, a bucket of seawater, and a smell you'll never forget. Out here, medicine isn't about healing. It's about surviving just long enough to see land again. Whether you walk off the ship whole or in pieces is a matter for the sea to decide. Life aboard is ruled by superstition as much as by wind and tide, and no one questions it because questioning it feels like inviting disaster. The crew watches the horizon with the same suspicion they give each other, always alert for omens that might sour the voyage. A lone black bird circling overhead isn't just a bird. It's a messenger of death, a warning that the sea is about to claim someone. Phantom lights, seen in the distance, flickering where no ship or shore should be, are taken as the souls of drowned sailors, luring the living to join them. Even a man's eyes can be enough to turn the ship against him. Too pale, too sharp, mismatched colors. Any of these can brand him unlucky, the sort of bad omen that makes men mutter and avoid standing too close. The rules aren't written down, but everyone knows them. You don't whistle on deck. It calls the wind in ways you can't control. You don't kill a gull. It carries the souls of lost sailors. And you never speak certain names aloud at sea, not unless you want to invite the very thing you're trying to avoid. When someone forgets and slips, the conversation stops, the silence thick enough to feel. Then the rituals begin, quick and urgent, as if speed might undo the damage. Appeasing the sea spirits is a constant chore. Coins are tossed overboard to buy safe passage, bits of bread crumbled into the waves to feed whatever lives beneath. Some men spit 3 times into the water before taking the helm. Others touch the mast and mutter prayers only they know. The rituals vary from man to man, but they all carry the same weight. If you don't do them, and something goes wrong, everyone will know who to blame. That's the part no one says aloud, but it's there in every sideways glance when a line snaps or a wave hits harder than it should. When storms rise, the offerings become frantic. You see men tear off pieces of jewelry they've worn for years, flinging them into the sea without hesitation. Someone dumps half a ration of ale over the side, watching it vanish into the foam with the solemnity of a funeral. The captain says nothing, but you notice his hand lingering on the hilt of his knife before he joins in, cutting loose a small wooden carving from the stern and sending it into the waves. Every man is suddenly more concerned with appeasing the invisible than with reefing the sail, and for a while, the ship is crewed by supplicants rather than sailors. The paranoia isn't loud, but it's constant. Men talk in low voices about who brought bad luck aboard, whose presence has stirred the sea's anger. If the weather turns foul or a rope breaks in the night, they start looking for patterns, connections, the smallest hint that someone has offended whatever powers rule the water. Once suspicion takes root, it doesn't leave. You've seen a man shunned to the point where no one will share a drink with him, his work doubled because no one will stand beside him at the lines. The crew claims it's for the safety of the ship, but it looks more like fear wrapped in tradition. You tell yourself you don't believe in any of it, that storms and calm, life and death are nothing more than the whim of nature. But in the long hours of darkness, with the ship groaning under the strain of the waves and the wind screaming through the rigging, you find your eyes darting to the horizon, searching for strange lights. You avoid stepping on the same knot in the deck twice. And when the storm comes without warning, you hear yourself muttering the same half-forgotten prayers as the rest of them. Because out here, superstition isn't just belief, it's law. And breaking it feels like daring the sea to notice you. It begins with a change in the water, not the swell of a coming storm or the restless chop of a shifting wind. but a movement that feels wrong, like the sea itself has decided to breathe differently. At first you think your eyes are playing tricks. The surface ahead seems to curve, the lines of the waves bending where they should run straight. Then the curve deepens, spiraling into a slow rotation, the deep blue shading to a sickly green as the sea begins to churn. It moves with a purpose, as if something beneath is pulling the ocean down into its throat. The sound reaches you next, low at first, almost a vibration under your boots, until it swells into a roar that drowns out everything else. It's not like the howl of wind or the crash of waves on rock. This is heavier, deeper, as though the ocean has found a voice and it's using it to warn you away or to call you in. You can feel it in your chest, the thudding resonance of something too vast to fight. It grows with each second until the rigging stops rattling, until even the gulls vanish from the sky, unwilling to fly near that sound. The crew spots it almost as one, heads turning toward the horizon, eyes narrowing. At first there's just muttering, the kind that passes between men who don't want to admit what they're seeing. Then someone curses under his breath, and the spell breaks. The whispers turn sharp, quick, frantic. Men abandon their idle tasks, rushing to the rails to stare at the slowly tightening spiral of water ahead. The closer you get, the faster it spins, foam streaking across the surface like veins. Panic doesn't come all at once. It spreads in thin tendrils, threading through the crew until every man's movements are just a shade too fast, his voice just a pitch too high. The captain stays at the helm, knuckles white on the tiller, jaw set so hard it looks carved from stone. He shouts orders in the same voice he's always used, the same measured bark meant to steady the crew, but it carries a tremor you've never heard before. He doesn't look away from the whirlpool ahead, not once, as though breaking eye contact would give it permission to drag the ship in. You've seen him face squalls and rogue waves with a scowl and a curse, but now there's something else in his eyes, a calculation, cold and desperate, weighing whether there's still a way out. The water changes color as you approach, the green deepening to black at the center, flecked with white that's not foam, but air being sucked under. The spiral tightens, moving faster, pulling stray bits of driftwood down into its maw and spitting nothing back. The ship's timbers groan as the current takes hold, a long, aching sound like the vessel knows where this ends. Men hurry to adjust the sail, but the wind seems useless here, swallowed by the pull of the water. Lines snap taut, blocks creak, and every footstep on the deck is quicker, sharper, as if speed alone might change the fact that the sea is already deciding your fate. The roar is deafening now. You can't hear the men shouting beside you, can't even hear the slap of the waves against the hull. Only the unbroken, grinding voice of the Maelstrom. The deck tilts, subtly at first, and then more. The spiral grows in your vision until it's all there is, an open throat swallowing the ocean whole. The air feels heavy, damp, charged, like the space before a lightning strike, and every instinct in you screams to turn, to flee, to get away from that impossible hole in the sea. But the ship keeps edging closer, drawn in by a force older and stronger than anything aboard. And for the first time since you set foot on this vessel, you see it in the captain's face, plain as the black water ahead. He's terrified. If you could stand above it, if you could see the thing from the calm safety of the sky, the Maelstrom might almost make sense. Modern minds would call it a tidal current, a collision of opposing flows where the sea rushes through narrow channels and is forced to spin, twisting on itself like a rope pulled too tight. They'd talk about underwater ridges and hidden reefs, about the way the moon pulls at the water until it's straining to tear free of the Earth's grip. They'd chart it on maps and measure it with neat little numbers, as if the mathematics could make the danger smaller. But you're not in the sky. You're here, on a medieval deck built with hand tools and prayer, and there is no language for what you're seeing except the kind that comes from fear. To sailors of this time, The maelstrom isn't a natural phenomenon. It's a wound in the world, a mouth in the sea that leads somewhere no living man should go. They don't picture currents and rock formations. They picture an open gateway to hell. The roar is the howling of the damned, and the black water is the smoke of their prison. Once you fall in, there's no rising again. Not even your soul makes it back. The stories have been circulating for as long as men have dared to sail this far north. Some say the maelstrom is guarded by serpents, their coils as thick as the masts, waiting at the bottom to wrap around ships that stray too close. Others whisper about the old gods, the ones from before the church came to these shores, still hungry for offerings and willing to drag a vessel under if they feel slighted. There are tales of ghost ships trapped in the spin, endlessly circling the dark center, crewed by skeletons whose bony hands still clutch the lines. No one laughs at these stories, not really. Not when the deck is already tilting under your boots and the air is vibrating with the roar. You see the way the men glance at the horizon, at each other, then back at the water, their eyes flicking like they're counting every heartbeat before the pull grows stronger. They mutter prayers or curses or both. The oldest among them don't speak at all. They just grip the ropes tighter, the muscles in their arms tense, as if holding on to the ship will keep the ship from slipping away entirely. You want to believe there's a way to outthink this. That, if you just knew enough about the forces at work, about tidal surges and opposing currents, you could find the one path that will carry you clear. But none of that knowledge exists here. And even if it did, it wouldn't change the fact that you're in a wooden box floating above a hungry spiral of water, and that every second is pulling you closer to its throat. The captain barks orders that sound confident enough, but his eyes don't leave the churning ahead. The crew scrambles to obey, but there's a strange edge to their movements, as if every man is doing the work while also preparing for what happens when the work fails. No one says aloud that it might be too late to turn away. No one needs to. The truth is, whether you believe in sea serpents or science, it makes no difference. The maelstrom doesn't care about your explanations. It doesn't care what century you come from, or what gods you pray to, or how tightly you grip the rail. All it wants is motion, and it will take it. From the wind, from the water, from you, until you're part of its endless spin. And right now, knowing why it happens is as useless as knowing the name of the blade that's about to cut your throat. It happens almost casually at first, as if the sea is testing you. One moment, the ship is gliding forward, the wind in the sail pulling you along the course the captain swore would keep you clear. The next, there's a shift beneath your feet. Not a wave, not a swell, but something deeper. A slow, deliberate tug that doesn't match the wind or the rhythm of the water. It's subtle enough that you might think you imagined it, until you see the way the foam alongside the hull has begun to slide sideways. The ship isn't just moving forward anymore, it's being drawn. The captain shouts for more speed, for the crew to haul the sail tight and catch every scrap of wind. Men run to the lines, but the sea has already decided its course. The current grips the hull like a giant hand, dragging you at an angle that no one on deck is aiming for. It's not a violent pull, not yet. More like the slow, certain pressure of something that knows you can't break free. The tiller strains in the captain's hands, the rudder fighting against the water's will. He grits his teeth and leans into it, but the ship answers sluggishly, each correction swallowed by the invisible force beneath. Then the first line snaps. It goes with a sharp, sickening crack, the sound of tension breaking all at once. The rope whips backward across the deck, and a crewman barely ducks in time to avoid losing an ear. Another line follows. The block it runs through spinning wildly as the loose end slaps the rail. Men dive to grab the fraying coils, but the strain is too much. They burn their palms and let go, cursing as the flapping sail jerks like a living thing trying to escape. The order comes to reef the sail, to bring it down before the wind tears it to ribbons. But it's too late for neat work. The canvas bellies one way, then the other, snapping so hard the sound echoes off the water. The boom swings in violent arcs, forcing men to duck low or risk a broken skull. Every movement is chaotic, no one in step, the crew more concerned with avoiding injury than following orders. The sound is everywhere: rope whipping, wood groaning, sailcloth cracking against the air. It's as if the ship itself is flailing in panic. Someone calls for the oars, and for a moment, hope flickers. Men run to the benches, pulling them free, setting blades into the water. The captain shouts the rhythm, the crew leans into the pull, and the wood creaks under the strain of human effort. For a heartbeat, you think you can feel the ship answering, edging back toward control. Then you notice the horizon hasn't shifted at all, except for the dark spiral of water growing larger ahead. The pull hasn't lessened. It's stronger now, the current swallowing every stroke without a trace. The oars dip and rise, splash and churn, but it's like trying to row through stone. The rowers keep at it, grunting, sweating, their faces twisted with effort, but you can see in their eyes that they already know. The Maelstrom has them. The sea doesn't care about muscle or willpower. It takes what it wants, and it wants movement. The current hisses along the hull now, a steady rush that drowns out the smaller sounds of the ship. Even the captain stops shouting for a moment, his jaw set, eyes fixed ahead as if he's trying to will the spiral to vanish. And then you understand, deep in your gut, that there is no more steering away, no more rowing clear. The pull has begun, and all that's left is to see how far down it plans to take you. The roar is no longer just in your ears. It's inside your skull, a steady, pounding presence that swallows every other sound. The captain's voice, usually sharp enough to cut through squalls, is reduced to a frantic blur of motion at the helm, his orders torn apart by the wind before they can reach the men he's shouting at. Sailors dart across the deck like startled animals, colliding, shouting over each other, their voices snatched and flung into the air, where they vanish against the endless grinding of the maelstrom ahead. Some men cling to the ropes with white-knuckled hands, their lips moving in prayers you can't hear but can read in the rhythm of their mouths. Others make the sign of the cross over and over, not out of piety but from pure, superstitious desperation, as if one more frantic gesture might be the thing that convinces the sea to spit you back out. A few lash themselves to the mast or the rail, not trusting their balance against the pitch of the deck. And then there are the ones who don't stop to pray or prepare. They shove past whoever's in their way, eyes wide and fixed on some escape that doesn't exist. The first fight breaks out near the bow. Two men screaming into each other's faces, each convinced the other has done something to bring this curse down on the ship. Their shoves turn into punches, wild and clumsy on the slick boards, until another wave of water smashes across the deck and knocks them apart. One of them doesn't get back up. He rolls with the water toward the rail, clutching at the air, until a hand grabs the back of his shirt and hauls him in. The man who saved him says nothing, just turns away like it was habit, like pulling someone back from the edge is just another task in the chaos. And then someone jumps. You don't see his face, only the blur of movement as he pushes off the deck and clears the rail, hitting the water with a splash that's swallowed instantly by the churning below. There's no cry, no struggle, just a flash of body in the foam and then nothing at all. No one has to say where he's gone. The maelstrom doesn't give anything back. The deck is tilting now, not in the lurching way of a storm, but with the steady lean of inevitability, the bow dipping toward the pull ahead. The pitch is enough to send loose barrels skittering, to make every step a fight against the slope. Men grab at whatever's bolted down, hauling themselves toward their stations, but more than a few are sliding toward the low side, their boots scraping for purchase on the wet boards. The ropes that haven't snapped groan under the strain, the sails flapping wildly in the chaos, each crack of the canvas like a whip across the air. You can taste the salt in your mouth, sharper now, mixed with the faint tang of panic that seems to seep from every man on board. Even the ones still working the lines, still obeying orders, are glancing constantly at the black water ahead, as if they're trying to judge how much time they have left. The answer, though unspoken, is written on every face. The Maelstrom is no longer something you're approaching. It's something that has you. And the deck you're standing on is leaning closer to its throat with every heartbeat. At first, it's just a bruise in the blue, a darker patch where the sunlight slips and can't find its way back. Then the color deepens, a slow corruption spreading under the hull. The water turns green, the kind of green that belongs to deep forests and old glass, not to anything that should be moving under a human body. It swirls in streaks and loops, braided like ropes being twisted by unseen hands, and every time the ship tilts, you catch a shimmer of that unnatural hue sliding past, quick and sly as a serpent. The men who still dare to look over the rail lean out and go quiet. Green means the shallow light is gone. Green means the bottom has teeth. By the time the first spray hits your face, the color has already turned. The green thickens, clots, and then collapses into black. A black that isn't the polite dark of night sky, but something heavier. A depth so complete it looks like you could touch it, and your hand would vanish at the wrist. The surface has the sheen of oil, and where it breaks violent. White foam flares up in ragged collars, then tears itself to spit as the current yanks it apart. You try to keep your eyes open, because not seeing feels worse, but the spray stings like thrown sand. It whips sideways, sideways again, and finds your eyelids no matter how you squint. Soon everything is a blur of black, white, and the sickly green hanging at the edges like a bruise refusing to heal. The smell changes too, and you feel it before you know it. Gone is the briny, busy stink of fish, tar, and men. What rises now is colder, hollower, like the breath from a cave mouth. It's the scent of stone that hasn't seen air in centuries, of water that forgot the sun existed. It scrapes the back of your throat and leaves a taste like old coins. You breathe shallow without meaning to, as if more air will invite more of that cold into you. Even the wind seems unable to move it along. It hangs around your head, heavy as damp wool. The deck answers the water. Every plank underfoot begins to thrum, not with the cheerful rattle of a ship taking a good wind, but with a low, animal vibration that runs from heel to jaw. It's a nervous system come to life. The timbers complain in long, aching notes, and the seams tick with tiny, traitorous clicks, as if counting down. When the bow drops, the sound changes pitch, a quick, panicked whine, and then settles into a new rhythm that's worse precisely because it means the ship has accepted this music. The nails in the rail hum against your palm. You tell yourself it's just wood and iron talking. It feels like screaming. Foam scuds along the surface in torn sheets and then leaps for the deck, spattering your face with cold so sharp your teeth ache. The spray isn't clean. It carries grit, salt-packed, dense as ground glass. It blinds the helmsman, blinds the mates, blinds you. And when you wipe at it, your hands come away slick with a film that isn't oil, but might as well be for how it greases the world. Somewhere forward, a man laughs once, too loud, too high, and the sound cuts off. When a new slap of water hits like a thrown bucket, every breath turns shallow and fast. Every blink takes too long. The black heart of the Maelstrom shows itself in pulses, like a pupil dilating, and each glimpse steals heat from your spine. You see the spiral lines laid over the surface the way a potter's fingers leave ridges in wet clay. They tighten as they turn, drawing your gaze inward until you have to wrench your head away or feel yourself lean toward the rail. The captain yells something you can't hear and hauls the tiller hard. The rudder shudders, complains, then snatches at a bite of water and is dragged like a hooked fish. The wheel ropes thrum under his hands. The ship doesn't so much obey as negotiate. Around you, the color keeps working through its cruel sequence. Blue retreating to green, green surrendering to black, black wearing a skin of shredded white. The current folds the ocean into angles you didn't know water could make. The horizon, which is supposed to be a straight promise, wobbles like a sick man trying to stand. You catch yourself spreading your feet wider and wider, as if you could grow roots and hold fast. The deck says no. It jitters beneath your boots, a horse deciding whether to bolt. When the hull hits the outer ribs of the whirl, you hear the new sound. A hollow boom from somewhere below, a drum beaten by a giant knuckle. It measures out the ship's descent with cruel patience. Boom, tilt, hiss of spray. Boom, tilt, ropes whining. You know, with the kind of certainty that makes the world go cold around the edges, that there's nothing gentle left in this sea. The water has stopped being a road. It is a machine. Men stop shouting as much and start working like their mouths would cost them time. Knots come tight with frantic skill. Hands run on stubborn memory, even as eyes squeeze against the sting. A coil of line slips, slaps, snakes through a block, and burns a palm bright red. The man shakes his hand once and keeps hauling. The ship's voice rises a note, then another, timbers layered in a choir of stress. It doesn't sound like it can last. You look into the black once, and only once, because your body insists. Something is moving down there that is not a thing but a direction, a wanting. It feels like standing on the edge of a long stair and realizing the steps go down farther than your life. The water has changed, and it is changing you with it. It doesn't come as a single towering wall on the horizon, the way you might imagine in a story. It builds in silence, a slow lift beneath the ship that at first feels like the start of another ordinary swell. Then it keeps lifting. The deck tilts back, sharper and sharper, and you have to grab the nearest line to keep from sliding. The bow points up toward a patch of sky already fading behind a spray of blown foam, and you realize the water ahead isn't lying flat anymore. It's curving. The sea has decided to fold in on itself, and you are at the bottom of its crease. Every groan in the hull deepens as the ship begins its climb. The timbers shudder, seams ticking like bones, and the sound of the Maelstrom's roar blends with the low, grinding rumble of water moving where water shouldn't. The swell rises at an angle that makes no sense to your body, your balance screaming that you're halfway up a cliff instead of afloat. The men hauling lines are bent almost horizontal, their feet braced against the tilt, their hands dragging the ropes close with each labored pull. One loses his grip, and the line whips upward, carving the air like a lash before slapping against the mast with a crack that makes everyone flinch. You feel the climb in your stomach before you know it in your head, an unsettling lightness, like your guts are trying to lift into your ribs. The bow keeps rising, climbing higher, until the horizon is a slanted smear of foam and sky. The wind catches your hood and yanks it sideways, cold spray stinging your cheek. Somewhere aft, a block clatters loose and swings wildly, each arc across the deck threatening to break bone. Men leap out of its way without pausing in their work, eyes locked on the rigging or the captain's frantic signals. And then comes the pause, that brief, unnatural moment at the crest, where the world feels balanced on a knife edge. You can see everything. The black spiraling heart of the Maelstrom to one side, the long, sheer slope of the wave ahead, the strip of sky above already spitting mist into your face. The sea holds you there for a heartbeat, just long enough to know what comes next. The drop isn't a fall so much as a surrender. The ship tips forward and gravity does the rest, hurling you down the liquid slope. Your stomach slams into your chest, your knees go loose, and your grip on the line tears at the skin of your palms. The bow knifes into the trough with a force that rattles your teeth. Water explodes over the deck, filling boots, soaking every seam. hammering the planks with weight enough to knock a man off his feet. A barrel breaks free and barrels. No other word fits. Down the slick boards, catching another wave at the rail and vanishing into the foam. Ropes go wild in the chaos, snapping taut one moment and hanging slack the next, whipping across the deck like live things. You dodge one without thinking, ducking as it whistles past your ear. A crewman isn't so lucky. It catches him across the shoulder and spins him halfway around before he stumbles against the mast. He doesn't stop to curse. No one has time to curse anymore. The swell doesn't give you space to breathe before the next one arrives. The ship is still recovering from the drop when the bow starts to rise again, dragged upward by another impossible angle. Every climb and crash feels heavier than the last, each impact shaking the rigging and driving a new groan from the ship's bones. You cling to the deck with your knees bent, your body swaying in a rhythm you can't control, waiting for the moment the wood beneath you decides it's had enough. In the stories, a wave like this is a single event, something you survive and then sail away from. Here, it's not one wall, it's a procession, and you're caught in the march. The first barrel breaks free with a sound like a drum beat, a hollow boom that you feel through your boots before you hear it. It lurches, hesitates at the lip of a scupper, then commits to the slope and charges. The deck has turned into a tilted alley, and the barrel is a thug racing downhill. It slams a knee, glances off a post, and keeps going until a wave lifts it and flings it against the rail. The lashings that should have held it, hemp gone slick and swollen, hang in limp, useless snakes. Another boom answers from the hold below, and another. The ship isn't just pitching now, it's emptying its guts. The mast complains in long, tortured notes, a deep groan that starts somewhere below the planks and rises through the wood like a trapped animal. You can feel the sound in your teeth, in the hinge of your jaw. Each time the bow climbs, the mast bows forward. Each time you plunge, it snaps back, the yard describing frantic arcs that yank at the shrouds until the dead eyes creak and the blocks chatter like bones. Tar squeezes out of seams in glossy tears. Men glance up when they shouldn't, flinching with each groan, because if the mast goes, it won't announce itself twice. Below, the hold turns into a lottery you don't want to win. Crates, casks, sacks of grain, anything not nailed down or too heavy to move, begin their slow migration toward the low side. The hatch covers clatter in their frames as if something is trying to get out. Someone shouts that the cargo's shifting and vanishes down the ladder with two others on his heels. You hear their boots splash, then the thud of bodies shouldering barrels back into place. The dull, wet thumps of casks kissing one another like boulders. Another roll, steeper, and the chorus rises. Curses, a scream, the cracking snap of a stave giving up. Water finds its way in the way it always does. First as a spit through the seams, then as a thread, and then as a sheet. The planks flex and exhale, and cold lines appear along the deck as if drawn by invisible knives. They lengthen, join, and become a shining skin of moving silver that sloshes from side to side. Every tilt carries it higher, into boots and against shins, a creeping, numbing invasion that steals heat with a miser's devotion. The pump handles begin their monotonous clank, men bending and straightening in a cruel rhythm while the Maelstrom's roar sneers over it all. On the next drop, a barrel from the upper stack decides its time. It comes down the ladder like a battering ram, taking the first man on the shoulder and spinning him into the bulkhead. The second tries to stop it with his body. There's nowhere else to stand, and the barrel drives him to his knees before a third man can jam a spar across its path. The wood groans, flexes, and holds. Barely. The man who went to his knees doesn't get up. There's no space for ceremony. Someone drags him by his belt to a higher patch of deck and leaves him there with water licking his boots. The sound of wood splintering is not loud. It's delicate, almost private, a series of quick, bright pops, like twigs breaking in winter hands. You hear it near the foot of the mast, and all the chatter on deck goes thin. Wedges at the mast step are working loose. A mate hurls himself at the partners with a mallet and a pouch of extra wedges, driving them in hard. Each strike a dull, heroic thud that fights a battle measured in heartbeats. Splinters skitter across the planks and stick in wet skin. Somewhere aft, another noise answers. A longer, lower crack that feels like it has age in it. The hull is telling you what it thinks of this plan. Ropes go from lifelines to weapons. A sheet snaps and whips across the deck, its free end writing a violent sentence in the air. It catches a man across the ribs and folds him like a letter. He wheezes, staggers, and keeps moving because the deck won't let anyone be still. Coils unroll themselves, slither, and wrap around ankles in mean loops. Hands grab, fumble, retie, fail, and try again. The sail, half reefed, half an accusation, bellies and collapses in manic cycles that slam the yard against its lifts and send a shudder down the mast like pain. The seams answer the pressure with wider mouths. Water pours in now, not as a suggestion, but as a decision. It gushes between planks and around the mast, shot through with sawdust and tar, and carries splinters and flecks of pitch like a black snow. Each wave that breaks over the bow converts to another inch, sloshing below, and the pumps can't keep up. The men at the brakes pale and keep heaving, their hands slipping on wet wood, their breath torn into ragged cords by the cold. A crate of iron fittings gives way and goes prowling. It clips a leg and you hear a sound you wish you hadn't. A crisp, clean crack that the sea swallows a heartbeat later. The man goes down, then under as the next tilt sends a wash across the deck that makes the world ankle deep. Two hands find him, yank him up, prop him against a bit. There's no splint, no bandage, no pause. His head rolls. His eyes keep moving, grim and stubborn, as if willing the bone to reconsider. The ship talks louder. Each joint contributes its own note, and together they make a kind of language you suddenly understand too well. Not long, not like this. The captain's mouth is a hard line. He points, signals, points again, because words are useless against the roar and the hammering and the thin, papery pops of wood giving up its secrets. You feel the barrel of the sea roll under the hull, and then feel the hull fail to roll with it. It's a tiny hitch, a hesitation where there shouldn't be one. The deck lists farther, and chooses not to come back all the way. The water on the planks hurries to the low side and stays there, tugging at knees, begging for ankles. Men lean the other way, as if their bodies could ballast a world. Everything that was supposed to stay still is moving. Everything that should move is stumbling. And the ship, faithful betrayer, keeps telling you the truth with every splinter and every breath it takes through its seams. It cannot hold much longer. It doesn't sound like a single catastrophic break, no deafening report that announces the ship's end. It begins as a groan deep in the ribs of the hull, a note lower than speech, and then a thin, traitorous pop that seems too small to matter. But the men nearest the sound go still. They look at one another, eyes wide, and without needing orders they start moving, because they know what follows a pop like that. A heartbeat later it comes. A sharp crack, wood giving way under more weight than it was built to bear, followed by a rush that drowns every other sound. Cold seawater pours in through the wound, as if it's been waiting for the chance. It doesn't seep. It doesn't trickle. It lunges, a solid wall of black-green forcing its way into the hold, carrying splinters, bits of oakum, and the smell of something that's been buried in darkness for centuries. The temperature of it is an attack. Men drop whatever they're carrying and scramble, their boots splashing through the first spread of water before it deepens to their calves. The cry goes up, "Bail, bail, bail," and buckets appear from nowhere. Wooden, iron-banded, some already cracked from earlier use, all of them clutched in shaking hands. They form a chain, but it's chaos, the rhythm ragged and uneven as men slip and curse and fumble their grip. The first few buckets thrown over the side vanish into the spray, as if the sea is mocking the effort. Another rush of water shoves through the break, higher than before, and the men nearest it stagger back, waist deep now, their faces lit with the knowledge that this is not a leak you mend. Still, they work. It's all they can do. The chain speeds up, the slosh of brine in the buckets loud even over the Maelstrom's constant roar. Arms strain, backs hunch, legs brace against the pitch, and still, the level rises. Water slaps against the cargo, spinning barrels and crates in slow circles before another roll of the deck slams them into the planking. A man goes down when a cask clips his hip, vanishing under the surface for a long, dangerous moment before hands find him and haul him sputtering into the air again. The pumps join in, their handles swinging like the pendulums of mad clocks. 2 men to a pump, their shoulders heaving, their palms blistered from rope burn and salt. The strokes are frantic, jerking, the kind of movement that ignores endurance because there's no later to save strength for. The gush from the outlet is steady, but so is the flood from the hull, and for every bucket or pumpful thrown away, another wave seems to slam through the gap to replace it. Your feet are numb now, the cold climbing your legs until your knees ache and your thighs feel carved from stone. Every breath you take is sharp in your chest. The smell is overpowering. Salt, tar, wet wood, and the faint, sour note of grain gone to rot. The water is no longer clear but clouded with debris. Splinters, shreds of canvas, lengths of rope that coil and uncoil like lazy snakes. Somewhere beneath it, you can hear the shifting groan of the hull as the break widens, the edges chewing against each other with every roll. There's no hiding the truth anymore. Men are working with the speed of people who already know they're losing. The captain's voice is raw, the orders fewer now, less about hope and more about keeping the ship afloat for another minute, another breath. Faces are pale, teeth clenched, eyes fixed on the work in front of them so they don't have to look at the water inching higher. A bucket slips from someone's hands, vanishes into the churn, and no one bothers to retrieve it. The ship shudders, a deep, rolling tremor that travels from the rail under your palm to the soles of your feet. The sound of the Maelstrom is closer now, deeper, heavier, its voice echoing inside the hollow spaces of the ship as if it's already inside. The water in the hold is past your knees and climbing. You bail, and you bail, and you bail again, because stopping is unthinkable, but you know. You've known since the first rush came through. The sea has found its way in, and it isn't leaving. There isn't a decision. One moment you're a creature of wood and rope, clinging to the ship like a barnacle with opinions, and the next, the deck tilts farther than your feet can manage. The rail is suddenly where the floor should be. The sky drops out from under you, and you're airborne for the tiniest slice of time, weightless, helpless, suspended above a roaring mouth. Then the North Sea catches you like a stone. The impact is a blunt, full-body slap that erases sound. Cold hits first, not as a sensation but as a total event, a wall that rams your ribs and floods every nerve with white static. Your wool explodes with water, heavy in an instant, each layer soaking and thickening until your clothes feel like they've grown a second body around you. The sea doesn't welcome you, it consumes you, and the weight of that soaking wool drags hard at your shoulders, your hips, your knees, as if a dozen invisible hands have grabbed hold. Salt water forces its way into your mouth before you can think to close it. It's not a taste, so much as a possession. The brine claws at your tongue, surges up your nose, burns the back of your throat with the sting of iron and old stone. You gag and cough, which only opens the door wider for the next mouthful. Panic isn't a feeling, it's a reflex. the animal inside you flailing at the ropes of soaked fabric that bind your limbs. You remember someone once told you to float on your back, to relax. Relax is a joke the sea tells to people who haven't met this cold. The shock steals your breath clean. Your chest clamps shut like a fist, the cold cutting your lungs to paper. You try to draw in air and nothing happens. The body refuses, guarding the last bit of warmth like a dying fire. Your heart hammers, pounding so hard you can feel the beat in your ears, in the sockets of your eyes, and you realize with a distant, almost clinical clarity that it's not the water that will get you first. It's the time without air. You kick, because that's what bodies do when they want not to die. Boots answer with the grace of anchors. Leather stiff with brine, soles slick as eelskin, they shove against nothing and slide away, giving you inches when you need yards. Wool wraps your thighs and calves in a cold embrace. Every motion answered by a tug in the opposite direction. You thrash harder, and the sea uses your effort like a clever fighter, turning each frantic movement into another way to pull you under. The world is only gray and black and white. Gray sky through a veil of spray, black water like oil, white foam that slaps your face and leaves salt crystals on your lashes. When you break the surface, the roar is everywhere and nowhere at once, a general's shout in a language you can't understand. When you sink, and you will, you sink into a dim, green-black, too thick for light, the cold tightening around you with the patient certainty of a closing fist. Your arms strain, your legs churn, and then the boots win again, and you're back under, lungs clenching, mouth filling, the taste of the end in every swallow. Somewhere above, the ship is already smaller. You catch it in a broken glimpse, a dark flank shoved up by a heave of water, the pale blur of the sail thrashing against the sky. Tiny people sketched in frantic lines across the rail. Someone throws a line, and it lands 10 paces away. 10 impossible paces through glue-thick cold. You reach anyway, because reaching is what you have, and the sea laughs in small, efficient ways, slipping the rope just out of range and offering you another mouthful of brine instead. You try to think, to stack the little rules you've heard. Kick the boots off, shed the cloak, turn on your back. Your fingers, cramping into claws from the cold, fumble at buckles that were easy in the dry and are impossible in the wet. Leather swells, knots swell, your hands shrink to numb paws. The cloak sticks to your shoulders like a second, drowning skin. You yank and tear and finally feel something give, a strap or a seam surrendering, and you float a fraction better for a heartbeat. Then the maelstrom reminds you that floating is not the game you're in. A long, low draw takes hold of the water around you, a tide within the tide, the whole surface slanting toward a distant, dark motion. It doesn't drag you like a current in a river. It persuades you, inch by inch, with the soft insistence of gravity. You try to angle out of it, to swim across the pull, but your boots are still half on and your clothes are another person's weight, and the sea has patience. Your arms burn, shoulders screaming, and each breath you manage feels thinner than the last, like you're stealing air from a smaller room every time. The cold eats the edges of you first. Fingers go, then toes, then the neat coordination of wrist and ankle. Your jaw trembles without your permission. Something inside your chest decides to cough and won't stop, each racking heave sending a flare of pain through ribs that had only just forgiven the fall. Your thoughts lose their sharpness. They smear like ink in rain. The ship is a rumor. The line is a rumor. Land is a word the sea doesn't know. A wave lifts you high enough to see the world one last time. The tilting deck, the captain, a statue of feudal command, the coil of rope lying useless where it fell, and for a bare moment, your face is in the wind and not the water. Your lungs seize the chance and haul in air so cold it hurts. It feels like a gift. The next wave takes it back. The pull is not sudden. It begins with a subtle grip at your ankles, A slow tightening that feels almost like a cramp, and then it grows. Your body knows before your mind does. The water has stopped being something you can move through and has become something that moves you. Every kick is weaker than the one before, every stroke undone by the invisible hand dragging you toward the dark. Then it takes you in earnest. The surface drops away above your head, shrinking fast, breaking apart into 1,000 shards of light that twist and scatter like coins in a thief's pocket. You try to chase them, but the current is stronger than breath, stronger than thought. The light thins quickly. At first, it's a murky green, the kind you might find in the shallows after a storm. Then it deepens into gray, the outlines of your own hands blurring in front of your face. In seconds, the green is gone entirely, swallowed by black that isn't empty but full of cold, full of weight, full of the steady, grinding force pulling you further down. You kick harder, your lungs already tight, the muscles in your thighs burning as though you've been running uphill in thick mud. The effort earns you nothing. Your ears start to ache. It's a small pain at first, a pressure that whispers, "You should rise. Rise now." But you're past the point where choice matters. The ache swells into a sharp stab, then a deep, splitting throb that makes you clamp your jaw and grimace into the dark. A muffled pop in one ear, then the other, and the pain doesn't vanish. It spreads, wrapping itself around the sides of your head, into the bones of your skull. The water presses on every part of you, not just from above, but from all sides. The kind of weight that makes your joints feel loose and your chest feel small. You don't know which way is up anymore. The current has no respect for vertical or horizontal, spinning you with lazy, relentless turns. Your arms drift in directions you didn't send them. A trail of bubbles escapes your mouth, and you try to follow them with your eyes, thinking they'll lead you to air. But in the dimness, they don't rise. They slide away at an angle, curling into the invisible spiral that has you in its grip. Panic flares sharp and bright. You kick toward where you think the surface must be, only to feel the drag grow heavier, like ropes tightening around your waist. The water has a sound here, not the crash and roar you knew above, but a low, constant growl, a bass note you feel in your ribs and teeth. It's the voice of something vast, patient, and certain of its victory. The darkness thickens until it's more than the absence of light. It's a texture, a velvet weight against your face and hands. You imagine the seafloor rushing up to meet you, though you can't see it. Your mind supplies jagged rocks, yawning crevices, shapes moving in the gloom that have never known the sun. Your chest convulses. The burn in your lungs is a living thing now, gnawing at the edges of your will. You clamp your lips together so hard it hurts, but your body is greedy for air, sending jolts of desperate need through every nerve. Somewhere in the struggle, your boots slip halfway off your heels, tugged by the pull below, but they cling stubbornly, just enough to trip your kicks into clumsy flails. You spin again, slower this time, like a coin losing its fight to stay upright. Bubbles crawl past your cheek. You chase them with your eyes, dizzy, but you can't tell if they're leading you up or deeper in. The black presses closer, the pressure gnaws harder, and the thin memory of daylight above you feels more like something you dreamed than something you touched just moments ago. The maelstrom doesn't rush, it draws, it turns, it holds, and you are far, far from the surface. It begins with shapes. At first, you think they're tricks of the dim water, a twist of current, a shadow slipping past, something caught in the shifting gloom. But then they linger. Edges sharpen where there shouldn't be any, outlines form where the dark should be seamless. Your vision pulses with your heartbeat, light and shadow bending into the suggestion of movement. The cold has already numbed your fingers, but now your thoughts begin to slow too, caught in the same drag as your body. Something curls out of the black below. It isn't quick. It uncoils, smooth and deliberate, like it has been waiting for you. Your mind supplies scales, pale as moonlight, shimmering faintly in the depths. A fin follows, ragged at the edge like torn cloth. It vanishes before you can decide if it was real, but the image stays, heavy and perfect, pressed into the space behind your eyes. You kick weakly, but it's like pushing against wet sand, every motion absorbed and erased. The darkness isn't empty now. Faces swim in it. At first, they're the crew. Men you saw above deck just minutes ago, their mouths opening in soundless warnings. Then their features change. Skin pales, eyes cloud, hair drifts like weeds in the current. Their mouths gape wider, too wide, teeth flashing where there shouldn't be any. These are not your shipmates anymore. These are the ones the Maelstrom has already taken, come to greet you, or claim you. The pressure in your head makes every blink slow. Between them, you see things that don't fit together. Vast jaws studded with teeth the size of your forearm, claws that could split masts, wings that have no business underwater. They move like they've been here forever, like this is their kingdom and you've trespassed. The old stories come rushing back, the ones told by firelight when the sea was calm, of serpents that wrapped entire ships in their coils, of demons that pulled men down to serve in black palaces beneath the waves, of spirits with eyes like lanterns, leading sailors to their graves. You try to remember where the story ends and the truth begins, but it doesn't matter anymore. Your mind isn't keeping those boundaries. Every shadow is a fin. Every ripple is a hand reaching for you. The seafloor feels closer with each pull, even though you still can't see it, and the shapes around you grow more confident, more solid, as if the deeper you sink, the more you enter their territory. Your chest convulses again, harder this time. Pain blooms between your ribs like fire, but colder. You clamp your mouth shut, eyes squeezing against the sting of salt. You know you have seconds left, your body screaming for air it can't have. The darkness outside matches the darkness edging into your vision, closing in from both sides. The shapes draw nearer, not lunging, just drifting closer, as though they know you'll soon be still enough for them to examine at their leisure. The stories told of drowned sailors who never truly died, who walked the ocean floor in ranks, still bound to the ships that carried them here. You see them now, their limbs moving too slow for life, their eyes like deep glass, their skin clinging in strips to the bone. They pass you without touching, their heads turning in eerie unison, their mouths shaping words you can't hear. Your brain insists they're real, that the Maelstrom has delivered you into their company at last. The world is narrowing to a single thought. Breathe. It drowns out the monsters, the ghosts, the legends. It becomes the only thing left. The need swells until it shoves past your will, and your mouth opens. Cold floods in, burning your throat, flooding your lungs with something heavier than air, heavier than life. The last thing you see before the black takes everything is a light, far below, swaying gently in the dark. You don't know if it's a lantern, or an eye, or just your mind's final cruel trick. Then there is nothing. The sea is quiet now. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of a room just after the shouting stops, when the air is still thick with what was said. The Maelstrom has spent itself, or perhaps just turned its hunger elsewhere, leaving behind a surface smoothed over as if nothing had happened. The swell rocks gently, almost tender, the same way a butcher might wipe his hands after the work is done. Debris bobs in the lazy rise and fall. Planks with their ends chewed white by force, casks cracked open and slowly filling, a single boot turning in the current. Pieces of sailcloth drift like fallen flags, their edges curling in the salt. Now and then something larger rolls into view. Half a spar, the top of the mast with a frayed line still clinging to it, before the swell hides it again. Each fragment tells the story without a word, a catalog of what was torn apart below. The gulls arrive quickly, as if summoned, Their cries are sharp against the flat air, slicing through the leftover silence with an indifference only scavengers can carry. They circle, dip low, splash at the surface where some darker shape floats beneath. The white of their wings flashes in the pale light, clean and alive in a way that feels almost insulting. One lands on a beam and rides it for a few seconds, then lifts off again when the swell tips it too far. The rest hover in ragged loops, waiting for the sea to give up whatever it's keeping. There's no sign of the ship, not even the shadow of her below, no dark smear to mark where she sank. The Maelstrom doesn't leave graves, it swallows whole, taking not just the bodies but the evidence that they ever existed. All that remains is the flotsam, shattered, unclaimed, meaningless to anyone but those who knew what it used to be. The water here feels oddly warm after the fury, a skin-deep layer heated by the pale sun, hiding the cold teeth of the depths just inches below. It shifts gently under the wreckage, carrying it farther from the place it came apart. Each wavelet pushes the pieces toward open sea, away from the unseen mouth that took them. Far off, the Maelstrom is already fading into a smear of motion on the horizon. From here, it looks small, almost harmless, a patch of churning water, no different from any other squall-born disturbance. The roar is gone, replaced by the faint hiss of small waves breaking against wood. If you didn't know what had happened here, you might mistake it for a place where nothing much ever does. That's the Maelstrom's oldest trick, not just to destroy, but to erase. Every now and then a shadow passes under the floating pieces, something large enough to rock them in its wake. It could be fish drawn to the sudden banquet, or just the swell reshaping itself beneath the debris. But it feels watched. The gulls seem to think so too. They lift in a flutter when the shadow passes, settling only once it's gone. The stillness is not comfort. It's the aftertaste of violence, the moment when the sea catches its breath before deciding what to want next. There's nothing left to see, and yet you keep looking, waiting for a head to break the surface, for an arm to wave, for the impossible return of something the water has already claimed. None of it comes. The only movement is the slow drift of the wreckage toward a horizon that will not remember it. Behind it all, the Maelstrom turns in place, patient as stone, ready for the next time someone is foolish enough to come near. If there are survivors, they don't arrive as people so much as wreckage with a pulse. They wash up face down on beaches that don't know their names, coughing water that tastes like iron and algae, their bodies salted into stiffness. When they roll over and blink into the light, the world feels wrong. Shoreline too steady, sky too quiet, the ground stubbornly disinterested in moving beneath them. Strangers find them. Fisherfolk with nets over their shoulders, a child herding goats along a cliff path, a monk walking the tide line for driftwood. The survivors don't speak at first. They rasp. They point behind them to the horizon, like the sea itself might come striding out of it on two legs. Then, the words return in a tumble of contradictions. Black water and white foam, and a sound like God's anger. Then a sudden silence so clean it felt like an insult. The first night on land is all shivers and fever dreams. Someone presses broth to cracked lips. Someone else rubs warmth into numb hands, and the survivors stare at the fire as if it owes them an apology. Sleep dredges up fragments that don't fit together. The masts at impossible angles, a rope that turned snake and bit a man's ribs purple, the captain's mouth forming orders no one could hear. In the morning, the fishermen ask careful questions, because news travels on stories, and stories begin with details. How far out? How strong the pull? Did the sea glow? Did it speak? Did you see its throat? The survivors answer the way the newly spared always do. Honest at first, then a touch brighter, sharper, as if mapping the horror makes it smaller. The listeners nod, eyes wide. By evening, the tale already has edges it didn't possess at dawn. When those survivors can stand, they drift toward the ports. pulled by the same instinct that drove them onto the ship in the first place. They don't go back to sea, not yet. They sit on benches outside alehouses and tell the story again for drinks they can barely stomach. Sailors lean in, elbows on knees, listening with the pessimism of professionals. A good story is a kind of coin in a place like this, and the survivors spend it carefully. They describe the color of the water turning from blue to green to a black that ate its own light. They talk about the sound, the roar, that got under the skin and lived there, and about the moment the ship changed from something that moved to something that was moved. The listeners ask the important questions in low voices. Where exactly? How wide? What tide? But even the practical men glance at the door when the wind pushes it open. With every retelling, something small grows teeth. A lantern seen in the depths becomes an eye, and then two. A pale arm glimpsed among the foam becomes a procession of the drowned walking just under the surface, their hair moving like seagrass. A wave like a hill becomes a wall, and then a cliff with a lip that curled over the ship like a mouth. None of this is deliberate lying. The mind repairs itself with narrative, and the Maelstrom refuses repair. So the story puts scaffolding around the wound, scales on the darkness, names on the currents, a logic to the senseless pull. Fear needs reasons. Lacking reasons, it will take images, and the ports are happy to trade for them. Soon the tale has legs longer than any ship's. It walks the length of the coast and crosses to other harbors on the lips of traders who swear they heard it from the man who was there, or at least his cousin's captain. It wraps itself around old legends and makes them new. The whirlpool that your grandfather said could swallow a flock of gulls, now it takes cogs whole. The sea mark your father swore by, it is just another tooth in a mouth that doesn't close. Priests preach caution cloaked in piety, warning that pride sails straightest into judgment. Tavern keepers carve little spirals into the wood of the bar with their thumbs while pretending not to listen. Mapmakers hear the story last and take it the most seriously. They scratch the coastlines they think they know, then hesitate with the quill hovering over a patch of sea that remains stubbornly blank. Some draw a careful spiral there, neat as a brand new coin. Some sketch a dragon or a mouth of jagged teeth and write Latin that translates to something halfway between beware and we give up. Others leave a washed-out patch with no ink at all, because absence can warn louder than pictures. Where the paper pales, fear stands in for cartography. The Maelstrom becomes part of the chart not just as a mark, but as a space where men look twice before laying a ruler across it. And fear does the rest. Captains add days to their routes rather than cut that corner. Mates grow stubborn about tides. A gull circling the wrong way sets a crew on edge for a week. A boy learning knots hears the story for the first time and ties them tight enough to blister. The Maelstrom spreads without moving, a fixed point that rearranges choices. It's on the lips of brides who watch the harbor and on the coins of gamblers who bet whether a ship will make it back. It is a warning and a wager and a prayer in one. The sea doesn't keep records, so people do, in ink and breath, and the small, stubborn rituals they adopt when they pass the place where the map goes thin. In time, even those who never saw it can describe it in such detail they might as well have been there. That is how legends work in port towns. They borrow your voice and return it with a tremor you didn't have before. And on quiet mornings, when the tide is turning and the water in the harbor begins to swirl, just a little, nothing like a danger, everyone looks up from their work at once. No one says the name. They don't need to. The map is already part of them. In the world before charts could be trusted and compasses pointed anywhere but true, the sea was an unbroken page where men wrote their fears in ink made of rumor. They filled it with creatures and curses, because a blank horizon is more dangerous than one crowded with known horrors. A sea serpent could be avoided. A storm was less terrifying if it had a temper you could bargain with. The Maelstrom was only one name in a long, whispered litany of things that waited beyond sight. Sailors spoke of serpents so long they could coil 3 times around a ship's hull and still have head and tail left to thrash. They said the eyes glowed in moonlight, green as harbor glass, and the jaws could swallow a man whole without breaking stride. They told these tales in the calm between squalls, sharpening the details like knives, each man claiming to have heard it from a cousin's captain or from a fisherman who saw the wake it left behind. Sometimes the serpent was a single beast, eternal and solitary. Other times it was a whole brood, scattered across the oceans, making the sea itself their nest. There were islands that moved too, black shapes on the horizon that stayed still just long enough for you to anchor. Then the land would shudder, rise, and slide away under the surface, leaving your lines slack in your hands. Men swore these were sleeping whales or turtles older than kingdoms, their shells furred with moss and small trees. If you were unlucky enough to build a fire on one, the heat would wake it, and you'd watch your solid ground swim away under your feet. Ghost ships were the worst kind of story, because they had faces. Sailors claimed they'd seen them in the fog, hulls pale as bone, sails ragged but full, moving without wind. Sometimes they trailed alongside for hours, close enough to hail, but the figures on deck never turned their heads. Other times they'd cut across your bow in silence, their passage leaving the water colder than before. A man could vanish overboard into the path of one and never make a splash. The Maelstrom was said to be where some of these ships were headed, an express route to wherever the drowned go to keep sailing. The whirlpool itself fit perfectly into this world, as if it had been made to hold all the other terrors in place. If a ship disappeared, it might have been eaten, or it might have been pulled down into that dark spiral. If the wind died suddenly for no reason, it was because the Maelstrom was drinking in the air. If the sea boiled under a clear sky, that was the edge of its reach, the breath before it opened its throat. The legend made it into more than water and current. It became a boundary marker in a world without fences. These stories weren't just for fear. They were a way of drawing maps without paper, of passing on warnings when few could read and fewer could trust the charts they had. A boy learning the ropes would be told about the serpent not to scare him, but to make him watch the waves for shapes that didn't belong. A mate who believed in moving islands would keep an eye on his anchor line in the night. A crew that knew ghost ships sailed. The fog would steer wider when the mist came down. Monsters were memory devices, as much tools as talismans, and they gave the chaos of the sea a shape you could point at. In a way, the truth was the same as the lie. A serpent might be nothing more than a sudden ridge of black water, a moving island just a shoal in migration, a ghost ship a trick of the light. But if calling it a beast or a spirit kept you alive, the name was worth more than the explanation. The Maelstrom thrived in that space between reality and invention, its pull deepened by the weight of every mouth that shaped it into something worse than water. By the time a sailor reached the far edges of his life, he could list the dangers of the sea as easily as his own children's names. Some were currents, some were storms, and some were things no one had seen and lived to describe. They existed in the same breath, part of the same ocean, each lending the others more reality by association. And always, somewhere on that list, the Maelstrom swirled. Half a fact, half a fable, and entirely a reason to steer clear. A mapmaker in the Middle Ages was as much a storyteller as he was a surveyor. His quill carried more than measurements. It carried judgment, rumor, and fear. When he sat down to draw the northern seas, the Maelstrom was never just a patch of swirling water. It was a decision, what to show, what to suggest, and what to leave to the imagination of the man who would take the chart to sea. Some drew it plainly, in a neat spiral of ink, centered off the coast of Norway, the lines growing tighter and darker toward a dot that seemed to pull the rest of the map into itself. Others gave it teeth, rendering it as a dragon's open mouth, waves for lips, a tongue of froth curling inward. There were those who inked skulls into the water, their hollow eyes staring up at the ship that dared pass overhead. The symbolism wasn't just for show. The men who read these charts didn't think of maps as neutral. A dragon meant something that hunted. A skull meant certain death. A spiral meant you could be dragged into the heart of the sea. And for many, the picture was more important than the coordinates. Latitude and longitude were useless if the ship's master couldn't read them or didn't trust them. But everyone understood the warning in a beast drawn larger than the ships themselves. Fear shaped these maps more than the coastlines did. Places where sailors returned with stories of wreckage were drawn darker, as if the ink itself had thickened in mourning. Regions that had never been sailed but were whispered about in taverns took on shadows they might not deserve. The Maelstrom's place was rarely fixed. It drifted from one map to the next, a reminder that no one truly knew its borders. A ship's captain could study 3 different charts and find the whirlpool in 3 different spots, its threat stretching over hundreds of miles. In a way, that made it more dangerous. If you couldn't mark the place exactly, then you had to assume it was everywhere. Some cartographers leaned into that uncertainty. Their maps gave the northern sea a wide, pale blankness, as if the ink had been bleached away. The emptiness was deliberate, an invitation to caution. Sailors understood that a blank space on a chart wasn't safety. It was a confession. It said, "Here be things we can't name." Better to shade the maelstrom in fog than to plant a marker and be wrong. A captain who thought he could skirt a danger by a few miles might risk it. One who didn't know how close it lurked would give it a berth as wide as the season allowed. There were whispered accusations about the worst kind of mapmaker, the ones who moved the maelstrom on purpose, placing it in the path of a rival's trade route or shading it close to a fishing ground they wanted for themselves. These were the maps that came with a curse, the ones said to have drowned men twice, once in the water and once in the stories told afterward. Sailors learned to weigh a chart in their hands, not for its paper, but for the trust they placed in the man who made it. A dishonest spiral could kill as quickly as any storm. In time, the maelstrom became as much a fixture of the page as the coastline itself. Even when cartography began to tilt toward precision, the old symbols clung on in the margins, a kind of insurance against hubris. The inked spiral might shrink, the dragon might grow faint, but it was still there, a ghost warning layered under the measurements. It reminded the reader that no matter how exact the lines, the sea answered to no one's geometry. For the men who sailed by them, these maps were less tools than talismans. You didn't just follow a course. You traced the edges of other men's fear, measuring yourself against what they dared to draw. And in the high latitudes, where the air grew sharp and the waves darkened with depth, every mark mattered. A line could be a path to safe harbor. A spiral could be a death sentence. No matter how the coast shifted or how the science improved, one thing stayed the same. The maelstrom was never left off the page entirely. Even when it wasn't there, it was there, an absence shaped like a warning. For a medieval merchant, the sea was less an adventure and more an abacus, each wave a bead to be pushed toward profit or loss. The northern trade routes were dangerous enough without the maelstrom lurking in the margins of the map. But danger didn't sink deals. It sweetened them. The fastest way to move wool, furs, timber, or dried fish between ports often meant shaving days, even weeks, off a journey by cutting across waters whispered to be cursed. A merchant's ledger did not care about curses. It cared about speed and cost, and the shortest line between two harbors sometimes skimmed the edge of the spiral. The math was simple, in the way all brutal arithmetic is simple. A ship that made it through faster could sell its cargo before the market soured, avoiding the glut that came with slower convoys. Beat the competition and you could charge more, sometimes enough to turn a modest voyage into a season's fortune. A captain who returned with both his cargo and his crew would be hailed as bold, shrewd, maybe even favored by God. That word, bold, tasted better than cautious when poured into a cup of ale in a crowded hall. And yet, every man who made the choice knew the other side of the sum. The Maelstrom was not a rumor to them. It was an equation with no middle ground. Either you passed it unscathed, in which case it might as well not exist, or you didn't, in which case it erased you entirely. Ships that vanished left no scrap to wash ashore, no slow trickle of survivors with ragged tails. They were simply gone, their debt books closing with a snap, their goods becoming part of the sea's inventory. Merchants had ways of convincing themselves the risk was reasonable. They paid navigators with reputations for luck as much as skill. They waited for what passed as favorable weather, according to a sky that could turn treacherous in an afternoon. They spread their cargo between several vessels, gambling that if one vanished, the rest would bring in enough to cover the loss. The calculus had room for death, but only in the same way it had room for mold or theft, a cost of doing business. Sometimes, the decision wasn't theirs to make at all. A royal order could arrive sealed in wax, declaring that a fleet would take the northern route for reasons known only to the court. A war brewing inland, a new alliance forming, a harvest too bountiful to store. It all translated into commands for ships to cut time no matter the hazard. Refusing such an order wasn't just bad for business. It was treason, wrapped in cowardice. And kings and dukes did not see whirlpools. They saw only the stretch of blue ink between 2 points and expected their will to pass over it unchallenged. Captains caught in this bind had to decide how much disobedience they could disguise as prudence. Some would skirt farther out under the pretext of wind shifts, claiming the Maelstrom lay miles from its usual haunt that season. Others obeyed to the letter, their crews gripping the rails as the water began to twist, hoping that whatever gods governed the spiral were in a generous mood. In the counting houses far from the shore, the Maelstrom barely registered as more than a variable. Profit could erase fear faster than prayer. A single successful run through those waters could pay for repairs, expand a fleet, or secure a seat at a table where decisions were made. And for some merchants, that possibility was intoxicating enough to dull the memory of all the names carved into the memorial boards of their guild halls. Every port had its own stories of the man who made it through and came back rich. He became a living argument in favor of trying, his good fortune shining brighter than the quiet absence of those who didn't, and so the dilemma never resolved. The Maelstrom stayed where it was, indifferent to the ledgers that pushed men toward it, and the merchants stayed where they were, leaning over their sums, tapping the page, and telling themselves that risk was only another kind of investment. Some gambles paid, most didn't, but as long as the sea could be turned into silver, someone would always point to the map, trace the shorter line, and say the words that had sent countless ships to their fate. It's worth it. A captain at sea is more than a man with a title. He is the thin plank between order and collapse. In fair weather, the role is simple enough. Measure the wind, mind the sail, keep the men busy and the cargo dry. But when the Maelstrom rises on the horizon like a dark blossom, all the rules of command twist under its pull. The captain is no longer simply steering a vessel. He is holding back the tide of fear that swells in every set of eyes fixed on him, and fear is heavier than any cargo. He knows the charts, such as they are. He knows the routes that might save them, the tacks they might take to skirt the spiral. But he also knows the sea doesn't keep promises, and that the men looking to him want not truth, but certainty. A good captain understands the difference. So he stands straight, his voice steady, his commands precise. The trick is to sound like the outcome has already been decided in their favor, even when every gust of wind says otherwise. In the back of his mind, the old superstitions begin to whisper. He might not admit it, might even scoff if pressed, but the habits creep in. A coin tossed into the water for luck is really a bribe for mercy. A glance toward the ship's cat becomes a quiet gauge of fate. If the animal's hackles rise, so does his pulse. He avoids saying certain words aloud, not because he believes in curses, but because the men do, and belief spreads faster than orders. Every sound becomes a decision point. The sudden whip crack of a sail rope might be a call to tighten rigging or a sign to turn back. A shift in the pitch of the hull's groaning could mean the current has them already, and if that's true, every other choice shrinks to nothing. The crew watches his face after each noise, measuring his expression more closely than the sky. If he flinches, the ship will follow. In moments like these, leadership is as much theater as seamanship. He must pace the deck with the casual stride of a man checking his own garden, even as he calculates the speed at which the spiral is drawing them in. He must listen to the navigator's mutterings without letting the panic in them bleed into his tone. And when a man whispers that perhaps an offering should be made, perhaps a chicken thrown overboard, perhaps something more, he must weigh the cost of dismissing the idea against the danger of letting the crew believe the sea is listening. The Maelstrom does not allow for half measures. The captain knows there will come a point when no clever tack or prayer will matter, and all that will remain is the choice of how they meet it. To fight the current until the timbers tear apart, or to angle into it and hope for a miracle in the churn. Both are gambles with odds too small to name, but one must be chosen, and chosen quickly, because hesitation is the one sin the sea never forgives. As the spray begins to sting harder against his cheeks, he takes in the deck one last time. The men gripping the ropes until their knuckles bleach, the sails straining against the wind, the horizon warping where the water folds into itself. The ship feels smaller now, as if the ocean has begun to press its hands around it. He squares his shoulders, calls out the next order, and watches it ripple down the line from man to man. The sound is swallowed almost instantly by the roar ahead, but it doesn't matter. They've heard him, and that is enough. A captain's burden is not only to steer the ship, but to carry the weight of every face aboard it, even when the only land in sight is the bottom. And once the choice is made, there is no turning back. Not from the course, and not from the eyes that will follow him into whatever waits in the heart of the spiral. In the ports, the Maelstrom lives longer than the men who meet it. It lingers in the pauses between sentences at the alehouse, in the way a sailor's gaze drifts seaward when the wind picks up from the north. Everyone knows someone who vanished there, though the exact details change with the telling. A ship left with a full hold and a fair wind, then nothing. No torn sail washed ashore, no broken mast tangled in kelp, no survivor crawling up the beach with a tail to trade for bread. Just absence, wide and unbroken. The ships that vanish become more than wrecks. They become cautionary ghosts. In the dark corners of dockside taverns, voices drop when the stories begin. A certain night, a certain tide, a certain ship that never came back. The facts are enough to make the beer taste sharper, but memory doesn't leave facts alone. It dresses them up in whispers of phantom sails glimpsed at dusk, a pale light rising from the water where the spiral is said to sleep. Some claim to have heard the voices of the lost in the wind, calling across the waves as if still on deck. Others insist the Maelstrom keeps their ships intact below, crew frozen at their posts, lanterns still swinging in the deep. Onshore, the loss wears a quieter face. Wives who stand at the harbor wall through a winter's worth of days, watching for masts that will never crest the horizon. Children who scan every arriving ship, each time hoping to see a father's shape among the crew. The waiting becomes its own kind of tide, receding when duty pulls them away, flooding back when the gulls cry over the water. Some stop waiting entirely, turning from the sea as if ignoring it could unmake the debt it has claimed. Others keep vigil for years, because to stop is to admit what they already know. In the counting houses, The news is cleaner. A line struck from a ledger, a voyage marked as failed. The Maelstrom appears in those books as a cost, no different than a stolen crate or a bad season's catch. But the numbers don't capture the way its memory coils through the streets, making sailors glance up at weathered ship bells hung above doorways or murmur a blessing when passing the shrine to St. Nicholas. There are those who swear the sea marks its prey. A captain who has lost a man to the Maelstrom is said to sail forever, with a shadow in his wake, the water behind him, a shade darker than it should be. A mate who has watched the spiral open and close is thought to dream of it every time he closes his eyes, the roar filling his skull until he wakes. The ones who return are marked just as deeply as those who don't, their stories threaded with the kind of silences that invite others to imagine what was left unsaid. The Maelstrom keeps its dead without cruelty or pity. It does not spit them out to warn the living, nor does it leave tokens behind. It swallows whole, and in doing so, feeds the legends that keep sailors wary. The absence itself becomes proof enough. A missing ship means the spiral was hungry that season. A string of disappearances means it is awake. And every time a voyage is planned that would pass its waters, the memory stirs, uncoiling in the minds of men who have never seen it but have heard enough to believe. So the Maelstrom moves through the ports not as a place, but as a presence. It drifts between taverns and markets, across wharves, and into the long rooms where voyages are charted. It whispers in the crackle of ropes on a windy night, in the slap of waves against the hulls at anchor. And as long as there are those who wait in vain, who listen for footsteps that will never come, the spiral will remain, not just in the water, but in the space it leaves behind. You thought you might cheat it, that there was some clever trick, some moment of timing or flash of instinct that could let you slip past the Maelstrom's teeth. Even as the wind screamed and the deck pitched under your feet, part of you held on to the idea that you could be the story no one believed, the one who saw it up close and came back to tell the tale. But the Maelstrom doesn't care about stories. It doesn't care about the sharpness of your mind or the strength of your arms. It takes in ships as easily as it takes in rain, and you were never more than one drop in the storm. If you learned anything in that day between sunrise and drowning, it's that the line between myth and reality is thinner than spray on your lips. The whirlpool the old sailors whispered about was real enough to drag you under, but so were the shadows that swam at the edges of your vision, shapes that could have been fish or could have been something older. You found no proof of sea serpents, no glowing-eyed monsters curling through the deep, but neither did you find reason to doubt them. When the water roars that loud and the sky is nothing but spinning clouds, truth bends to whatever your fear will let it be. The Maelstrom doesn't need to be exaggerated. It's a natural force, born of currents and tides, measurable in charts you will never read. And yet, all those medieval maps with their spirals and dragons feel more honest than the clean lines of modern navigation. They understood what the whirlpool really was. Not just a phenomenon, but a threshold. A place where the sea reminds you that your knowledge, your tools, your certainty mean nothing here. Even now, with steel hulls and engines that can push against storms, ships give that stretch of water a respectful berth. They track it with satellites and measure its pull in knots, but they still glance twice at the weather before drawing too close. There's no profit worth finding out what happens if you miscalculate. That wariness is the Maelstrom's most enduring victory. It has been feared for so long that even those who no longer believe in curses act as if one lingers there. You don't survive it. Not in the way you survive a storm by limping into harbor with torn sails and bruised ribs. The Maelstrom doesn't leave you limping. It swallows you whole, and in doing so, it erases you. No trace, no witness, no final message in a bottle. The only thing left is the space where you used to be, quickly filled by the next wave. If there is a lesson in that, it's not about bravery or skill, it's about humility. You sailed out thinking the sea could be outwitted, that a danger made of water could could be conquered by wood and will. But the sea doesn't notice when it wins, and the Maelstrom doesn't tally its kills. You were just another ship in a long, unbroken line of ships that believed they would be different. Somewhere above the surface, gulls circle. The water smooths out. The current spins on, patient and tireless. The sky moves overhead without looking down. The Maelstrom doesn't remember you, and it doesn't need to. It will be here tomorrow, and next year, and in the centuries to come, turning forever in its place, waiting for the next set of sails to appear on the horizon.